You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk. We are very excited today because we have one of the leading academic institutions in the BioHealth Capital Region that we happen to be a partner with, which is Georgetown University, and we have their team who is working with Georgetown Tech Ventures to assist and grow the commercialization of intellectual property, technology, services, software, and all other things that Georgetown has that might be unique and proprietary. And we have three individuals on this podcast today. This is somewhat unusual, but I think it's appropriate because we have people doing different things to support GTV, as it's referred to. And first of all, we have the leader of GTV, Tatiana Litvin-Vechnyak, who's Vice President, Technology Commercialization at Georgetown. We also have Christon Hill, who is the Program Manager of GTV. And we have Jennifer Butler, who is an entrepreneur in residence with BioHealth Innovation, but is the lead EIR working with GTV at Georgetown, all joining BioTalk today. So welcome to all three of you. And what we're going to start with is that a lot of people like to know a little bit about your backgrounds, how you evolved into the roles that you have today, and why Georgetown. So I'm going to start with Tatiana, who can do a self-introduction. And Tatiana, please let the listeners know a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thanks, Rich. And thanks so much for having all of us. Really pleasure. So I have been at Georgetown for 3 years at this point, a little bit over 3 years, in the role of the vice president, overseeing the team at the Office of Technology Commercialization. My background is in life sciences. I have a degree in pharmacology from Weill Cornell Medical College in New York City. I rotated through different labs before I landed on the lab and the research area that I focused on for the years that I was there. I was at Sloan Kettering in oncology lab and then landed at the Weill Cornell. And then after that, I went on to do a postdoc at the Cancer Institute of New Jersey with Dr. Joseph Bertino, who was in oncology and prior to that was at Sloan Kettering for many years. It was there that I decided to pivot into the area of intellectual property management at universities and technology transfer. And the reason why that happened was twofold. Number one, my project involved creating an antibody drug conjugate using an antibody from a company called Eli Lilly. We were targeting prostate-specific membrane antigen, hoping that it will become the new therapy for prostate cancer. And it didn't work. And we tried something else, and it didn't work, and we tried something else. And 2 years later, finally decided that it was time to move on with life. And so it was at that moment that, number one, I became curious, how does this work? The relationship between academia and industry. It was interesting to learn about the different timelines, priorities, IP ownership, and all of those things that at the time seemed to get in the way of research and grand ideas in the lab, but also allowed me to see into the thinking of industry and understand better their priorities and sort of why they do things the way that they do. So with that, I decided that I wanted something just a little bit more fast-paced, not 2 years between questions, but maybe, a week or two or a month. So moved into the technology transfer office right there. At the time, it was the University of Medicine Dentistry of New Jersey. They were kind enough to take in an intern. I think their first intern, sort of self-proclaimed. I offered to make coffee. They took me up on the offer. I did not make coffee for them. And then I moved on to Mount Sinai School of Medicine, where I was for a couple of years. The role there was to, number one, learn sort of the licensing, IP evaluation and all of that, but also to develop relationships with faculty, to learn to sort of speak industry and IP speak to scientists, and then bring the science speak to IP attorneys and business development folks in industry. Then I moved back to New Jersey to University of Medicine and Dentistry, which then became Rutgers University in 2013, I believe. I grew through the ranks there. And by the time that I left for Georgetown, I was the associate vice president for the whole operation called Innovation Ventures. And that included the IP management team, the licensing team, the new venture creation team, and the commercialization gap funding. We did lots of large public research institution with a relatively large team. We did a lot of amazing things with support of great leadership there. That was very industry focused, research translation focused. It just so happened that I knew of Georgetown and Georgetown Tech Transfer Operation because when I was in the lab as a postdoc of Dr. Joseph Bertino, we had a joint invention with a researcher at Georgetown University. And then when I became the licensing manager at Rutgers, I was the licensing manager managing that joint invention with Georgetown University. And the company that we ultimately spun out through a lot of hard work and lots of zigzags just signed a sublicense and continues to live on through lots of trials and tribulations. So very long-winded way to explain how I got to Georgetown. It's been 3 years. It's been amazing. Amazing region, amazing people, amazing research. So an amazing team.
Tatiana, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's very interesting to see the career progression you've had, which was seen very natural. And your Rutgers loss and the BioHealth Capital Region in Georgetown's gain. So we're glad we have you here. Next, working also at Georgetown is Christon Hill, who's the program manager at Georgetown Tech Ventures. Christon, please introduce yourself.
Please and thank you. First, thank you for having us. I feel my imposter syndrome flaring up in full force because this is a collection of some heavy hitters. So I'm glad just to be here in the conversation. As for my background, I'll try and be as brief as possible. I'm relatively old at this point. So let's rewind 20 years, graduate from FSU. My first undergraduate degree is English and Religion, become a stand-up comedian. From there, I go into explosives technician, unexploded ordnance, chemical weapons specifically, rendering safe, not manufacturing. Then I accept a commission as an officer in the Marine Corps, where I become a ground intelligence officer, infantry platoon commander, scout sniper unit leader, crisis action planner, foreign military advisor, and the direct support team officer in charge, as well as program manager for unmanned technology for 2nd Marine Division. On my final deployment in the Horn of Africa, while there, I get trained as an EMT to support one of the missions that I'm on, fall in love with the life sciences, resign my commission from the Marine Corps, go back to UNC, where I study molecular biology and medical humanities. There, I fall in love with biotechnology because one of my areas of study is trying to increase the protein yield of grain crops in order to combat chronic underfeeding in developing nations. So I fall in love with that aspect of it, graduate. During this time, I also start a venture. It's a rental platform that does fairly well, had a successful exit there. Apply to Georgetown because it has the oldest biotechnology program in the country. It's the first of its kind, which is, I'm a bit of a traditionalist in that regard. I want to go back to the source and learn from there. So I applied to Georgetown. Part of the program is an internship component. I applied to intern with the OTC. And then after about 3 months of interning there, they stood up this program, the GTV. I had some previous program management experience, threw my name in the hat. Tatiana said, you have a punchable face. So if anything goes wrong, we can throw you under the bus for driving, which hasn't happened yet. It's fully stocked with a very supportive team and some great researchers. And here we are almost 2 years later and still working, still loving it.
Great. Thank you. And talk about a non-traditional way to get to where you are. Very good. It shows that basically, though, you do have an entrepreneurial spirit and having a successful exit's very good, Christon. You told me something I didn't know, that this was the oldest bio program in the country in an academic institution. So that's a new tidbit that I didn't know about the BioHealth Capital Region that we should promote more, that we have the oldest standing bio academic program in the United States at Georgetown. So
biotechnology specifically.
Biotechnology is great. Well, thank you for that. I'm interested to learn more. And last but not least, we have Jennifer Butler, who I know extremely well. She's one of BioHealth Innovation's entrepreneurs in residence, but has been spending a lot of quality time with Georgetown and the Tech Venture and the Office of Commercialization office. So Jennifer, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I also love these background on folks that you get to work with because I've learned so much about Christon and Tatiana on this call, which is absolutely fantastic. And if anybody needs somebody with a high tolerance for risk, I think based on what Christon just described, I think he's been in very high risky businesses for quite some time. So my background is always really been at the intersection of business and science. And I can say that now almost looking back on a career, sometimes you don't realize that as you're moving forward through a career. But early on, I started with equity capital markets in Manhattan, working for a large investment bank. And at that point, we're taking companies on the road. That was really my first exposure to kind of an executive pitch. How is it that these individuals have really gotten a company, which I used to joke about these early stage companies, they might be late stage clinical, and getting them to raise capital. And by doing that, it was just a great opportunity to kind of see just the amount of work that's done by these teams to really go out there and raise hundreds of millions of dollars. And at that point, about 50% of the deal flow that went over my desk kind of as an analyst was in healthcare. And then I really, at that point, decided I was going to fully kind of commit to healthcare as that having had a science undergraduate degree in the physiology and neural systems at Penn. Going from there, I pivoted into the industry. I grew up at a company locally here at MedImmune, also sometime at Emergent Biosolutions. And then when it was acquired by AstraZeneca, that really provided a great opportunity for me to work within a large organization and get all the opportunities that a large organization can provide to you, all the different roles. And so continue to have corporate strategy roles, market insights roles, commercial leadership type of roles. When I left AstraZeneca, feels like quite some time ago, was at that point the global head of immuno-oncology for launching that first wave of checkpoints that were coming into the oncology space at that time. And what I really kind of found was that the thread for me is I've been the kind of commercial voice at the R&D table really kind of throughout my career. And then at that point decided that I wanted to start taking that big pharma experience and beginning to move it into smaller companies. Began taking on C-suite roles at smaller companies, moving to companies that might have only raised $100 million, quote unquote. And then just have been really energized by working with smaller companies. Now I've taken on roles in which I've kind of helped in a partial capacity fill out executive teams with small biotechnology companies, even so small where you get to the point where it's only the CEO who is the full-time employee. And that really kind of brings me to this intersection of working with Georgetown Tech Ventures, is that over the last few years as an executive in resident with BHI through Montgomery County, and now working as a lead through Georgetown, is this idea of bringing all of that experience and perspective kind of in a full circle, bringing it back to small companies such that you can kind of meet them where they're at, accelerate them where they're going, help them maybe make less dead-end turns. We're trying to really kind of get to the straightest path to translating this technology into commercialization. That's me in a nutshell.
Well, thank you. And it's a big nutshell, Jennifer. So what we have is the three musketeers for Georgetown Tech Ventures with basically all differing backgrounds, all bringing all that experience together now, which actually is like a little melting pot for Georgetown. So, but Tatiana, basically a lot of tech transfer offices, Office of Commercialization at different academic institutions have different missions and goals. I think it would be good for you to give a little perspective on how you have positioned the Office of Commercialization and Georgetown Tech Ventures based on your 3 years there now. So let's get a basic introduction to GTV and the Office of Technology Commercialization.
Sure. So the Office of Technology Commercialization at Georgetown has been around for quite some time. I want to say going back to at least 2000s. And of course, the innovations that have been translated and brought into the real world came about even before the office officially existed. So some of the exciting innovations that Georgetown brought to the world include the whole body CT scanner way back when, and with Dr. Ludley, and Allegra, the allergy medication that is everywhere on pharmacy shelves, as well as some of the critical components of the Gardasil HPV vaccine. So those are the more well-known. Office of Technology Commercialization generally is a central university-wide unit that supports all of the discoveries, innovations, intellectual property that comes out of research activities or scope of employment activities of folks within the university. For example, we don't work with students quite as much. There's a different unit that supports their entrepreneurial aspirations. If they ever have intellectual property specific question, of course, we help. But we primarily work with intellectual property owned by the university, primarily as a result of research primarily funded by federal government or other typical ways of funding for the university. In terms of our mission is ultimately to serve humanity and real world impact, broader impact. And to do that, we have to provide excellent service to our internal stakeholders, our researchers and faculty. So that's how we view the work that we do. Ultimately, we have to make sure that our technologies and innovations make it out the door. And then we have to support our researchers and innovators in the best possible way for them to do their best possible work, doing the research and doing the innovation and ideating. We do that through educational programs, network building, strategy, advising, etc.
Well, great. Thank you for that macro introduction to it. And the reason we have Christon here as the program manager, he can go into a little more detail about the programs that come out of GTV to supplement what Tatiana's introduction was. So Christon, talk a little bit about the programs.
Absolutely. So to piggyback off of what Tatiana mentioned, yes, we're there to close the gap between what could be promising research or sound science and what could be a successful venture or, commercializable product. The way we go about doing that are a number of initiatives. So we have, first and foremost, what was formerly called the Faculty Entrepreneurship Academy, is now referred to as Impact at Georgetown. There have been 2 modules of that. Module 1, and they're both entrepreneurial training. Module 1 is all about taking complex scientific research and or technology and breaking that down into a value proposition that a non-technical audience can listen to for about 60 seconds, where you explain the commercial value, the societal value, rather than just the scientific merit of the invention. That's module 1. With that comes a pitch parade where they're given 60 seconds in one slide. And these are very technical people. These are PhDs. These are lifelong researchers who are breaking that down and translating their own research for a commercially minded audience, or at least a non-technical audience. Mod 2 of Impact is all about building either your Sequoia-style pitch deck, along with a rough business plan or at least path to commercialization, as well as an additional track that focuses on strategic partnerships. So you might have a researcher who wants to co-develop their technology with, pick entity. We walk them through the steps of understanding how and why those kind of partnerships exist. That module culminates with roundtable discussions where they get one-to-one feedback from the instructors to interested and entrepreneurial or commercially minded principal investigators. And then there is our Innovation to Impact seminar series, which is where we invite subject matter experts, whether it be regulatory expertise, successful operators, folks that have launched companies, spin-outs from universities, or they're academic researchers, or IP strategists, attorneys, etc. They come in, they speak for about an hour about that. There's a free lunch, which is part of the reason it's a well-attended event. And then there's networking that occurs so that our researchers can see, there are people who have this knowledge and who have made this leap and have done so successfully and are willing to share that expertise with us. Then we also have our advisor program, where we have most of whom are alumni from Georgetown or have worked with business school in some capacity. These are, again, subject matter experts who bring facets of their expertise to the early stage technologies so that they can, 1, be de-risked, 2, identify actionable next steps, and 3, begin the process of enacting said steps. And then most importantly, I would argue, is our partnership with BHI, BioHealth Innovation, who helps us go through our catalog of technologies, our portfolio of technologies, decide which of those are the most commercializable in the current market, which might be commercializable 6 to 18 months from now, and which are, for lack of a better term, the ones that maybe need to be culled from the herd or put on a back burner for a little while. Does that answer your question, or did I just talk a lot?
No. I think that was a very good summary of what you're actually trying to do to stimulate an entrepreneurial culture at Georgetown. And we recognize that every scientist and researcher does not want to be an entrepreneur. That's very important for everybody to understand. And basically, it's probably less than 5% of those who are in academia that actually want to pursue that career. So but you're there to help support those who have that interest in trying to progress it. But you talk about the relationship with BHI. I'm going to get to Jennifer in a second, but she's waving at me like she wants to say something right now. So, and Tatiana has her hand up too. So before we get into the next question, we're going to get some follow-on, first from Tatiana and then from Jennifer. Go ahead, Tatiana.
Perfect. So as Christon was talking, I just realized that we failed to mention one really important sort of catalyst moment in the OTC GTV transition and evolution. And that is the EDA grant, the Build to Scale grant that we got. EDA, of course, stands for Economic Development Administration. And they have a series of grants that are aimed at spurring capacity building expansion in different regions, aimed at creating new jobs and doing more economic development, such as startup creation. So when I joined Georgetown 3 years ago, of course, before taking the job, I did a thorough study of all the metrics of Georgetown University. What's the research expenditures, number of invention disclosures, number of licenses, revenue, number of startup companies. And I immediately saw a couple of opportunities. One of them included the startup creation. I was puzzled and surprised at how few companies were launching from Georgetown. And as I mentioned, I knew Georgetown research because we had a joint invention, so I knew the researchers were great. I realized that it's got to be a culture and perhaps a lack of support system. And that's exactly what it was. What's also interesting, there are and were lots of entrepreneurial faculty and innovative faculty within the university. Georgetown is a private institution within Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is not a state. And as such, there isn't the same state level funding for economic development initiative activities, specifically for a place like a university and the needs of a university. That's changing, I think, within the DC landscape and the way that our wonderful neighbors in Maryland and Virginia look at us and open opportunities that exist for folks and companies and universities within their state, making them available to universities within DC. But that's what I saw. And so we applied to the EDA Build to Scale grant with the goal of building that capacity and infrastructure to do more startups that would advance Georgetown innovations, discoveries, and research through the startup path. So that's essentially how Georgetown Tech Ventures was born. And that's how Christon became the manager of that program and has done a terrific job. One other really important point that I want to mention about Georgetown and the operation that we have, and that's the alumni network. Georgetown alumni are amazing. They care deeply about their connection to the university and to the success of the follow-on students and follow-on discoveries and innovations. And they want to give back through their either time or money. And so we leverage that. In fact, one of the programs that Christon just mentioned, the advisor network, is in fact largely staffed by folks that are alumni, not solely, but many. I have an advisory group that helps me think through the strategy for OTC, and there are a lot of alumni on that, not exclusively, but they bring that deep care and understanding to Georgetown. And then the other really important program that we have is the Gap Fund program. The Gap Fund program, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, was seeded through a philanthropic donation from one of the alumni at the university. So all of these initiatives are incredibly important for success of programs like ours. So yes, philanthropy, and very much so the expertise and care of our alumni.
Thank you for that. I think that's some very good background. And to be honest with you, if you hadn't applied for the EDA Build to Scale grant, we wouldn't be talking today as a partner with you, because a lot of academic institutions don't have the budgets that are necessary to support these types of progressive activities. And that's enabled you to expand your mission and your capabilities by leveraging some external resources to complement what you've built in an internal team. So for people listening, NSF has programs, NIH has programs, EDA has programs, SBA has programs. Christon and I were on an SSTI webinar yesterday about entrepreneurial programs at academic institutions. And, I think for those academic institutions that might be listening, That's a good thing to do, is explore those external resources that could complement what you're doing and potentially provide some supplemental funding to you. So, Jen, I know you had your hand up about 10 minutes ago, so I hope it's still relevant what you want to contribute.
Well, I want to really just build on maybe two parts. First, I want to go back to Christon's comment about where specifically BHI and EARs have spent initial time and maybe what has evolved from the beginning.
Right.
I think that it's pretty standard within a tech office to want to have a commercial assessment done. I think one of the things that we've done over the last 2 years is to create a bit more structure and transparency and very specific action steps for both the tech transfer office to be leading, who's on first type of thing. Where can the tech transfer office support NGTV? Where is the onus on that founder for a next step that's really going to move that technology forward in the most productive way toward a translational piece? And then also asking the third party like BHI, what are the type of market assessments, networking, how to leverage our networking capabilities? So I think that's really been that in a much more and hopefully a very specific way. I mean, people really need to be given direct kind of marching orders versus generic. So I always like to say it's very easy to provide a gap analysis. Now the question is, how do you fill those gaps and do that? And so we try as best we can as the third party to be like very specific. Hey, we need this gap. That may be a very specific individual we're trying to find to support that company. It may be a very specific task. We try to do that. And that's what we've kind of done with Georgetown, creating that very structured framework. I think the second piece that Tatiana brings up too, I want to focus on is funding and resourcing. And that's been a particularly challenging environment. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge over the last year with all of the insecurity, we'll call it, in federal funding and where that's been and pauses, that's been a big question. When you have a partner like BHI, once we know about a technology, we're also trying to proactively push funding opportunities that we see in the ecosystem. So Rich, you just rattled off a few other opportunities. I mean, that is honestly what people are looking for. A lot of times they're like, I don't know where to find maybe that opportunity. Where is that going to be posted? And so having people that are really close to these ecosystems can also really amplify the opportunity. And having people maybe think out of the box of why that particular solicitation may actually be a good fit for that, or how to create a consortium around that. Because what we're seeing that with like ARPA-H, a lot of those monies are coming through this idea of we are no longer going to, I'll say, tolerate that a single institution can provide the best outcome working in a singular fashion. So now we have to really be thinking about how are we bringing in other collaborations academically and through partnerships. And so you're beginning to see that. And that's, I think, also a really key attribute of Tatiana and Christon, which is they have this networking mentality. Georgetown in of itself can do better, spin out more companies, and they will do that both by working within enhancing their culture and capabilities and looking at others in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think the key point there is a couple. One, having an independent third party can help the management of the Office of Commercialization. And we're going to get into this, Tatiana. First of all, you have to build a pipeline, then identify within the pipeline that which has some translational or commercial potential. Sometimes you get pressured, I would imagine, by administration, deans, researchers, or scientists who have fallen in love with their research, but they may have no commercial potential at all. And also, it's very costly to maintain a patent portfolio within an academic institution. So the question becomes, if you have limited resources to work with, how do you number one, build your pipeline, and number two, identify those things that have the greatest opportunities for success. And Jennifer talked a little bit about that, but I'd like to hear your philosophy on that, building the pipeline and also some of the challenges associated with that.
Rich, I think this is the holy grail, how you do that and doing it well and doing it in an inclusive, open and transparent way that inspires people rather than shuts them down is incredibly important and incredibly difficult. So I think it begins with, number one, building sort of the trust with the researchers, being responsive to them as you evaluate their technology and understand that when they don't hear from you, it feels like a black box and therefore trust immediately dissipates. And then whenever we say no to somebody, we explain why. We lay it out in front of them. These are the challenges to patentability that we found. This is the lack in, some of the experimental either design or validation that we find with the help of BHI sometimes that, help us identify the killer experiment that needs to happen. So we bring all of that to the researcher. If there's disagreement, we listen carefully to their viewpoint, again, building trust. But most of the time, when we bring either our own valid argument as to why we shouldn't move forward or why we can't move forward, we do reach agreement and we do reach an understanding. So in terms of pressures and falling in love with their research, of course, that happens. And we have to carefully and delicately balance that. Also, sometimes with an understanding that, frankly, sometimes researchers are well ahead of their time. And so sometimes we have to be patient with them. And if they say that they believe and they're going to do steps XYZ to prove to us and essentially the rest of the world, sometimes we go out on a limb and we let them do it and we carry the expense of that. But there has to always be a specific strategy and accountability. And if we say that we're going to do something, provide a report, identify a contact, help with funding, we have to do that. That's how it builds trust. If they say that they're going to bring us the data and result validating experiment XYZ, then they have to do that. And so it's a two-way street and it's trust. And it's the same with leadership. Luckily, in my career, I've had very little sort of unreasonable pressure to file on something that would be potentially ridiculous. I've never had to do that. Some patience and some trust, long-term trust is good.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. Yeah, patience, persistence, and trust. Christon, I know you're going to have a hard stop, but Jennifer and Tatiana are going to be able to stay on a little bit longer. Talk about a little bit of those things that you would like to relate to the listeners related to continuing on the program theme and some of the other activities that you're engaged in.
Absolutely. Yeah. To add to what Tatiana was saying, like the important thing is to build that founder education into the office's core work. Like that is a foundation of what we do. It's not ad hoc advising. It's repeatable programming that shows them what they need to do, what the next steps are, what questions they need to answer as researchers looking to commercialize. In addition to that, we create practical founder tools. We're drafting a startup guide for university researchers that are looking to, commercialize their research, whether that be through new venture or otherwise. Pathway map, milestone checklists, simple decision frameworks, stuff that gated decisions that let you know which path, whether that be licensing, optioning, strategic partnership, co-development, or, new venture creation. We're not trying to push people towards any one of these options. We're trying to show them which is the best option available to them. And part of the way that we do that, yes, is providing that feedback, building that trust, but also bringing in, to Tatiana's point, those outside operators early so that they get that exposure to people that have actually built, have actually secured funding, have scaled companies, and not just, and this is not to dunk on what our office does, but administrative guidance. Like it's better to have that actionable insight with steps mapped out in front of you. And that's what we try to do. And in that, we build coordinated handoffs. So yes, IP evaluation happens with the OTC and then decide on the commercial potential of that. And then whether it be licensing or optioning, it stays, mostly with the licensing managers at the OTC. But if new venture is a potential, then it comes to the GTV pipeline. And then it goes and gets handed off to BHI's EIRs, such as Jen, specifically Jen in this case. And then from there, we start introducing them to those ecosystem stakeholders and players so that they progress and nothing is in a silo. It's all in the same process.
Thank you. That's a nice progression. And you mentioned handoff. So I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer, because once it's handed off to a BHI entrepreneur in residence, of which we have 33 now throughout the United States. And that doesn't mean, even though that Jennifer is the lead EIR at Georgetown, we have access to take advantage of the knowledge and the networks of all of our team to help support what's going on in Georgetown, whether they're in the region or not. But Jennifer, talk a little bit about this handoff, or where the intervention with BHI begins and the process continues.
Absolutely. So there will be, let's just take a very specific example that we're kind of in the middle of helping do an assessment on a technology that GTV's put in front of BHI. There is such a breadth of technologies that come forward. Some at times will be, I'll say, within more my wheelhouse. I did drug development. And so those are things where I may feel more comfortable managing a lot of the questions and working with our analysts at BHI to do the work. There will be some technologies that immediately I go, this is outside of my wheelhouse. And this is exactly to your point about why having 33 EIRs and the multiplier effect of their network to be able to tap in, because this is the thing. Tatiana mentioned this earlier. Some of these technologies are really on the cutting edge, okay? And the likelihood that, my kind of prior experience, if I'm trying to leverage it versus a framework, is going to help that person. You do need to be able to go and particularly find those folks who can really understand that. But I also think you also want to find folks that have that entrepreneurial spirit, I'll call it, or I don't even know if that's the word, but the ability to be really creative about where these potential IP could go and how to get it there in a fast way. So it's kind of like, what's kind of the first place that you can put a technology that can kind of get its foothold to generate revenue. And then you can begin to see lots of revenue stacking kind of behind it. All of that, though, to your point, is leveraged through people, the network, the experience. But I see myself as either a person who will contribute in that moment to the assessments and the work and my network, or a clearinghouse in which I'm going, okay, this is where I think we need to go. How do we bring in those individuals? I think that's most important, is just to know that I know what I don't know type of thing, but that we've got an incredible bench behind us.
Yeah, let's talk. And Tatiana, please add on to that.
Yeah, obviously I want to be careful. As much as I love BHI, I don't want to turn this into a commercial for BHI, but here we go. We'll add some strong positivity here. That I want to mention two specific, incredibly helpful outcomes from this relationship. Number one, we have so we're actually going to have a research and innovation showcase on April 22nd for our listeners at Georgetown University. If you want to see what's going on and some of the exciting research and new venture output, please join us. The information is available on our website, otc.georgetown.edu. And one of the companies that will be featured there is called Pushcart Therapeutics, which is a result of the relationship between Georgetown and BHI. And we're absolutely thrilled about the mission of the company, the science behind the company, the people behind the company, and how BHI specifically helped us launch that company. One of the EIRs is a CEO of the company and moving it forward through a variety of ways, including fundraising, actively fundraising right now. And then there are several other examples, but another notable one is a medical device technology that we were advancing and still are advancing through Georgetown. It's not yet a company, but I strongly believe it will be soon. And BHI was incredibly helpful in terms of looking for funding opportunities and helping us draft the best application for the funding opportunity. And just going through that process, number one, drafting the application and receiving feedback and digesting feedback and taking it for sort of actionable items back to the researcher is incredibly helpful. So yes, I just want to second the fact that the bench of EIRs that BHI has is responsive to the breadth of research that we have at the university, which is incredibly helpful. And just the network reach is also incredibly helpful. And that's exactly why we're thrilled to be working with you.
Well, thank you, Tatiana. I'm not going to relate my next comment only to BHI, but it's in listening to people in university tech transfer or offices of commercialization throughout the United States. One of the biggest challenges that they have identified is what we call the talent innovation gap. We always talk about the capital innovation gap, but the talent innovation gap is sometimes even bigger, because once you've identified something that has commercial potential, but you might want to form a company around it, you're very rarely going to find an individual at the academic institution, the scientist or the researcher, that has the entrepreneurial experience to start up a company. Or, thank goodness, Tatiana has an alumni network that they might be able to tap into, which a lot of institutions do. But finding somebody who can be the startup CEO, the CTO, the CBO, all of these C-level people, having a fractional person come in when you don't have a lot of resources that can help package the company, get it positioned to actually become a real company, is really one of the challenges that most tech transfer offices have. So we learned that throughout the United States. We understand the need, and thank goodness we have a team of people that we might be able to tap into. And if it's not our team, there's other people around in the network or in the United States that might be able to brought into this to start being that fractional startup role. And more importantly, if you don't have a lot of money, one of the ways you can incentivize these people is to actually give them equity in the company to be on the initial cap table, because you can't pay them a lot of money, but then they get motivated to help grow the value in that equity within that company. And I'll stop there, but I think that's just something that I'm seeing as a common need throughout the United States, through all academic institutions, no matter how sophisticated you are or not. And something that, as Tatiana had mentioned, there are many different creative ways to address that. So let's talk a little bit about the BioHealth Capital Region, which is Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. If any, what are the benefits for Georgetown University residing in Washington, D.C., and then sort of having Virginia, a robust Virginia and a Maryland on either side of D.C. and Georgetown? What benefits there are to Georgetown, but to be a part of a region like that? And I'm going to ask Tatiana first.
Well, first of all, lots of benefits. Number one, obviously our researchers, faculty, and staff all live either in Maryland, Virginia, or DC. Our students frequently end up in Maryland, Virginia, or DC. And of course, the region itself is embedded in a place that has things like NIH, FDA, BARDA, growing biotech and medtech base in terms of companies, et cetera. So I think in terms of the expertise that is in the area, it is fantastic. Tapping into that is fantastic. As we discussed, there are some challenges specifically for Georgetown being private institution in Washington, D.C., and not quite having the organizations like TEDCO and programs like MII support the early emerging technologies. But the opportunities are there. The collaboration is very strong. Maryland is very welcoming to our companies. Virginia is very welcoming to our companies as well. We have several in both. But we really also do want to contribute to DC. This is the city where we are. Georgetown is one of the universities, obviously, of many in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of research happening. There's a lot of output that's happening, and we could really contribute more to the economy of the city of DC and diversify the economy of the city away from some of the usual government items. So all of those initiatives are currently underway. DC launched a fund that is working to attract companies. They launched a funding opportunity called Tech Ecosystem Fund that we're sort of thinking about how to position ourselves for. So lots of opportunity. It's a wonderful place to be. And with that, I'm going to let somebody else comment.
Yeah. Go ahead, Christon. Go ahead.
First, to echo everything that Tatiana said, I think to put it succinctly, like it's about making the ecosystem part of the program, right? It's if our office is going to be more entrepreneurial, more commercially successful, not to say that it hasn't been, but if it's going to increase those successes, you can't just stay on campus. It's not a campus-bound activity. You need to actively build relationships with successful and unsuccessful founders, with successful funders and some questionable ones. So you have that litmus test. Not, well, questionable might be the wrong term, but some less reputable or less experienced, less seasoned. That way you have that dichotomy, you have that frame of reference. So you start to understand more facets of the entrepreneurial journey. And those partnerships have helped us not only shape and direct these companies, these technologies where they're going to land or at least settle, but it's helped us combat one of the major issues that DC has, which is leaking scale. Like, yes, DC spins out a lot of companies, starts a lot of companies, but at a certain point, they tend to leave. Part of what OTC, GTV, BHI, and to a certain extent, the mayor's office are doing now is attempting to sort of put a lid on, or a net, what pick metaphor analogy, around the ecosystem so that that talent is retained and those companies scale here. So you do see those economic impacts. Part of the way that we're going about doing that is partnering with all these ecosystem stakeholders.
Thank you. Tatiana, yeah?
I just realized that we also should absolutely mention a couple of our local partners within Georgetown. So within the business school, we have Georgetown Entrepreneurship initiative, or I think they go by Georgetown Entrepreneurship, with Jeff Reed leading that team. And they do a lot of work and activity supporting the student entrepreneurs and alumni entrepreneurs. And so they contribute to the BioHealth Capital Region in that way through some of the activities and educational programs that they have and the networks that they have. And we plug into them as well. There's a new initiative under them called Business of Health, and Dr. Sandeep Dahiya is leading that effort. And so they will also be contributing in a major way through convening, education, network, advisors, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure there's many more, as well as you work with everybody. I mean, one of the things that's happened with the creation of GTV and your entrance into the region, Tatiana, is Georgetown wasn't as visible in past years. Now, you and your team network everywhere, you put on events and actually let people know about what's going on within the institution in the Tech Ventures office, which I think that outreach is extremely important to make people aware and create greater awareness within the region about what the priorities and what the strengths are of what GTV is building. So, Jennifer, anything you want to add about the region?
Having worked in Maryland, essentially for all of my career, because that was where MedImmune was and AstraZeneca, and then also as in Montgomery County, which had that pilot program in which they were supporting Montgomery County companies. I will just say that when you look at the Maryland side, and we just recently know that they're really looking to, I'll say, double down in the investment in kind of that biohealth corridor along 270. I mean, there's a long history in Montgomery County and in Maryland and doing that more broadly. And you're seeing that with the investments in Baltimore. And then on the other side with Virginia Catalyst in Richmond. And I would just say that companies, whether they're choosing to be in Maryland or they're choosing to be in Virginia, or to your point, Tatiana, opportunities that DC begins to provide to these companies, there are funding opportunities, there are incentives for companies that want to do that. And so as an extension of when technologies leave Georgetown, they have to go somewhere, knowing where it makes sense for them to go from a facility standpoint, from a talent standpoint, and for all those type of things. I think that there's opportunities to place that still within the encatchment area of the DMV, which I think we would argue is up to Baltimore and now all the way kind of down even into Charlottesville and elsewhere. So you can catch that. Everyone's still trying to invest in the area.
Thanks, Jennifer. This is going a little bit longer than a typical podcast, but I think there's so much information that rather than cut it short, I have two more questions we're going to ask for everybody. I'm going to start with Tatiana. What does success look like for GTV? What do you see as short-term success and long-term success for Georgetown and the GTV program?
Number one, more durable pipeline, more engagement internally and externally. Researchers who see entrepreneurship as a viable path, whether for themselves or in collaboration with an external entrepreneur, and trust OTC and GTV as a partner. Of course, licensing revenue ultimately increasing and being reinvested into the research enterprise, because that's what happens under the IP policy, that the revenue that we get gets reinvested. And Georgetown known for producing companies and contributing to products that matter in areas of scientific strength. And of course, the broader impact, discoveries that improve lives, and faculty who feel supported in making it happen.
Thank you. Christon, how about you? Anything to add to additional success goals?
Absolutely. First, I want to echo the betterment of society. That's number one, top of list is why we do what we do. So I have some pretty specific metrics that I'm supposed to hit under the EDA grant. So I won't go into those, but increasing the number of startups and spin outs coming out of Georgetown clearly is of importance to me for its ability to contribute to the economic development of the region. But I would say the biggest thing would be measure the system quality rather than just the volume. Busy is not necessarily productive. So it's not just counting. I'm not saying that these metrics aren't valuable. They are, but it's not just about counting disclosures or startups or spinouts. Like tracking that increased researcher participation, very important. Seeing demonstrative evidence of increased founder readiness, having more advisor engagement along the way for those gated decisions, as well as having, follow-on progression, whether that be funding, hiring folks, C-suite or otherwise. And then also just the decision quality that is a result of the process. Like once we're able to repeat and scale these decisions and iterate faster, or maybe not faster, but more efficiently for the companies that are coming out and the technologies that are coming out, that for me will be like a very key indicator of success.
Thank you, Christon. And then Jennifer, as an independent third-party supporter of GTV in the Office of Commercialization, what do you see as your personal goals to help them achieve their goals?
I'm very much aligned with this idea of, I would say, culture, I think, is an important component to it. I think in speaking with Tatiana and Christon, some of the more interesting things that fall off of the very technical aspects of productivity is about how do you begin to change an organization in that way. And although that kind of heavy burden is on Tatiana and Christon to do that in that organization, I think that's something that as I'm sitting as an outsider to kind of figure out where to kind of contribute that is also a really key thing in service of having these big societal benefits and these technologies going into the hands of patients and the people that can really benefit from it.
Thank you. This has been very educational and thought stimulating for me, and I'm sure for some of our listeners. But I want to close now with a takeaway for the listeners. And what about lessons learned? You created GTV 2 years ago. You've had the EDA grant. You've got a little more time going in the future. Tatiana, you've been there 3 years now. Let's talk about lessons learned through this whole experience around the Office of Technology Commercialization and Georgetown Tech Ventures that might be takeaways for others who are trying to do some of the same things that you're doing now. And I'm going to start with Christon. I'm going to let Tatiana close at the end, but we'll start lessons learned from you, Christon, first.
Man, lessons learned early and continued engagement with the OTC is only going to benefit researchers so that they're thinking about commercialization left of the research pipeline rather than right. I would say, again, to echo what we've said earlier, the community engagement, the ecosystem engagement is absolutely vital. Taking feedback from folks as to how to improve your programming or how to position your technologies to appeal to funders and entities in your ecosystem is also important. Understanding what industry is looking for in certain verticals or sectors and explaining that to your researchers relatively early on is also important. But the main thing I would say is flexibility on both the part of the researcher and of the OTC and those trying to advise them for their technology. What do I mean by that? One, you mentioned earlier, falling in love with your technology or your solution without fully comprehending the problem and or who is going to pay you to solve it. Answering that question early on, very important. Helping researchers understand that that is a question they need to answer is also very important. Outside of that, I would say the main thing is, and this is going to be very micro application, is create templates. Everything you do, create a template so that you can reuse it, so that you're not constantly re-chiseling that wheel. You can just go to the shelf, take it off the shelf, and adapt it however you need to. That has been invaluable.
Thank you, Christon. And then Jennifer, as a BHI EIR supporting Georgetown, what are the lessons you've learned?
When we've been interacting with these founders, you do have to recognize that there's a certain momentum when we do some of these engagements that really can help that engagement be very successful. And so really kind of recognizing, are you catching these folks and they understand that we need to keep moving forward. We've got these action items. I think that we've really seen a lot of success when we find that right moment in which they see value to the program, they stay engaged, they help move things forward. Momentum is so critical.
Great. Thank you. And then Tatiana, last but not least, lessons learned from the leader of the Office of Technology Commercialization.
So I'm going to take it slightly in a different path. Storytelling. Storytelling is so critical. You mentioned that Georgetown was not as visible in the BioHealth Capital Region, for example. Obviously, everybody knows Georgetown University, and it has an amazing brand and an amazing name and amazing alumni and all of that. But in terms of research and innovations and impact that has had on society over the years, I think not many people fully appreciate. And I think that goes to say, not just for Georgetown, but across the board. With the recent insecurities in funding, as Jennifer mentioned, we in our tech transfer world and research world realized just how the general population society underappreciate the life-saving innovations that touch their lives every day, where they come from. And so telling those stories over and over again and celebrating innovators over and bringing them front and center at different events and on the Facebook page of the university and the LinkedIn page of the university is so critical. And I'm very pleased to say that OTC has actually played a major role in that. We've spearheaded several research stories that ended up on the front page of Georgetown University's LinkedIn and Facebook and the main university page. So we need to do more of that, and that's going to help the wheel spin. People learn, people get inspired, people come back, do it more. To Christon's point about repeat and scale, very important.
Great. Thank you very much. I think I want to congratulate you, Tatiana, and Christon, Jennifer, for all that you've been doing right now with GTV. The job is just beginning. It's not done. There's a long way to go. The road to success is always under construction, and we're in that construction period now. But I want to thank Tatiana Litvin-Vechnyak and then Christon Hill, Program Manager, and Jennifer Butler, Entrepreneur in Residence with BHI, for being on BioTalk today. I look forward to seeing everybody on April 22nd at your annual event to showcase everything that's going on at GTV. And I know that we can help promote that through our social media. You're doing it with your social media. So that event, I think, is open for the public to come and observe. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Very good. Great. So thank you all three. We're going to come back a year from now and see if you've accomplished everything that you told the EDA that you were going to do for them in 3 years. So thank you very much for being on BioTalk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to talk bio anytime.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.